There is a skeleton in a cave in Iraq. It belongs to a Neanderthal man who lived roughly 45,000 years ago. His right arm was withered and useless, probably from birth. The left side of his face had been crushed at some point, leaving him blind in one eye. He had degenerative joint disease, a healed head wound, and a body that by every measure of survival in the Pleistocene should have been dead decades before it actually was. He lived to about 45. For a Neanderthal, that is old. He could not hunt. He could not fight. He could not do most of the things that kept his species alive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And yet, someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone looked at this broken, half-blind, one-armed man and decided again and again for years that he was worth keeping alive. That skeleton is called Shanidar 1, and he was excavated by Ralph Selecki in the 1950s from Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan. Eric Trinkhaus at Washington University in St. Louis has spent decades studying his remains. And the conclusion is always the same. This man was not abandoned. He was not left at the edge of camp to die. He was supported deliberately for decades. And he is not an outlier, he is a pattern. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, another elderly Neanderthal with severe arthritis, broken ribs, and almost no teeth was deliberately buried around 50,000 years ago. Same story. Different cave. We tend to assume the ancient world was ruthless. That survival was so hard, and resources were so thin that anyone who couldn't carry their weight was simply left behind. It's a clean, logical story. It also happens to be wrong. The archaeological record tells a very different one, and it starts even earlier than the Neanderthals. In 2005, a team led by David Lord Kaipanidze at the Georgian National Museum published something that quietly rewrote a piece of what we thought we knew about early humans. At the site of Dmanisi, in the Republic of Georgia, they found a skull belonging to a Homo erectus individual who had lived roughly 1.77 million years ago. That alone would be significant. But here's the thing. This person had lost all but one of their teeth. Not recently. The jawbone shows extensive bone resorption, meaning the teeth had been gone for years before death. This individual could not chew, could not process raw food, could not do the one thing that every living creature on the planet needs to do to stay alive without help, and they didn't die. Someone in that group, 1.77 million years ago, before language as we understand it, before art, before burial, before anything we would recognize as culture, made the decision to keep this person fed, to soften food, to share resources that were not abundant. That is not instinct. That is a choice. Now move forward a million years, give or take. Kenya, roughly 1.6 million years ago. A female Homo erectus whose skeleton is cataloged as KNM-ER1808. Alan Walker at Penn State analyzed her bones in the 1980s and found something unusual. She had hypervitaminosis A, most likely from eating the liver of a large predator. The condition causes agonizing bone growth across the limbs. Walking would have been excruciating. Running would have been impossible. And the bone pathology shows she survived for weeks, possibly months in this state. Someone carried her water. Someone brought her food. Someone stayed with her while she lay in pain in a world where stopping meant you were vulnerable to everything. And they did it anyway. Think about what that actually means. These were not modern humans. They did not have hospitals, religion, written codes of ethics, or any social institution we would recognize. They had small bands, stone tools, and each other. And they chose, repeatedly, across species and across continents to take care of people who could not take care of themselves. And the evidence keeps accumulating. In Spain, at the site of Atapuerca, in a deep underground chamber called the Cima de los Huesos, researchers found the skull of a child who lived about 530,000 years ago. Ana Gracia and her team at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid published the analysis in 2009. The child, sometimes called Benjamina, had craniosynostosis, a condition where the bones of the skull fuse too early. It causes severe cranial deformation, increased pressure on the brain, and almost certainly some degree of cognitive impairment. This child would have looked visibly different from every other child in the group. Different skull shape, different behavior, different capabilities. And that child survived to somewhere between 5 and 8 years old. In a world without medicine. In a world where nobody had a name for what was wrong. Someone raised that child. Someone fed that child, carried that child, watched over that child for years, knowing full well that this particular child was not like the others. That is not tolerance, that is commitment. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because it wasn't just the severely disabled who were kept alive. People who were different in visible, obvious, unmistakable ways sometimes ended up occupying positions of unusual importance. In 2008, archaeologist Lior Grossman at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem excavated a burial at Hilazon Tachtit, a cave in Galilee, modern-day Israel. The burial dated to about 12,000 years ago, belonging to the Natufian culture. Inside was the body of an elderly woman, roughly 45 years old, who had a pronounced limp caused by a fused pelvis and spinal deformity. She was small. She walked differently from everyone around her. She would have been immediately recognizable in any group. And she was buried with 50 tortoise shells, a human foot, parts of a wild boar, an eagle wing, a cow tail, a leopard pelvis, and 2 marten skulls. That is not a normal burial. That is the burial of someone who mattered. Someone the group believed had access to something the rest of them didn't. Grossman's conclusion, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, was that this woman was almost certainly a shaman. Her physical difference wasn't a liability. It was, in the eyes of her community, evidence of power. And this pattern shows up across cultures. Ethnographer Mirsha Eliade documented in 1951 that across Siberian, Southeast Asian, and indigenous American cultures, people who experienced seizures, unusual psychological states, or visible physical differences were frequently identified as having a shamanic calling. The very thing that made someone different was the thing that made them sacred. The logic, if you can call it that, was straightforward. If you don't fit the ordinary world, maybe you have a connection to one that isn't ordinary. In southern Italy, at Romito Cave, a skeleton dating to about 11,000 years ago belongs to a teenager with acromesomelic dysplasia, a rare form of dwarfism that left him roughly 1 meter tall with severely shortened limbs. He could not have hunted. He could not have done most of the physical labor required of a Paleolithic adolescent. He survived to about 17 and was buried carefully alongside an adult woman, possibly his mother. David Freyer at the University of Kansas analyzed the remains. This was not abandonment. This was a community that carried someone for 17 years. In Florida, at the Windover site, Glenn Doran at Florida State University excavated 168 burials dating to about 7,000 years ago. Among them, a teenage boy who had lived with spina bifida until approximately age 15. Spina bifida, 7,000 years ago, in a swamp, with no medical intervention of any kind. Someone kept that boy alive for 15 years through a condition that challenges modern medicine. And then there is the case that might be the most extraordinary of all. At the Man Bac site in northern Vietnam, dating to about 3,500 years ago, Lorna Tilley and Mark Oxenham at the Australian National University found burial M9. A young man who was almost completely paralyzed, quadriplegic. He could barely move his upper body. He could not move his lower body at all. And someone fed him, cleaned him, moved him, and kept him alive for approximately 10 years. 10 years of total dependency. In a society without wheelchairs, without plumbing, without any of the infrastructure we consider essential for caring for a paralyzed person today. Tilley used this case to develop what she calls the bioarchaeology of care, a systematic method for studying ancient disability, published in her 2015 book. Her central finding, drawn from cases spanning millions of years and every inhabited continent, is blunt. Care for the different and the disabled was not rare in the ancient world. It was normal. Now, was it universal? No. Plutarch wrote that Sparta examined newborns and disposed of those deemed unfit, though modern archaeologists have found little physical evidence to support systematic infanticide at the site he described. Rome's 12 tables, around 450 BCE, permitted the killing of deformed infants. But these are products of large, stratified civilizations with codified laws and rigid social hierarchies. The earlier record, the deeper record, the one that stretches back not thousands but millions of years, tells a different story. For most of human history, being different did not mean being discarded. It sometimes meant being carried. It sometimes meant being revered. It almost always meant being seen. Not as a burden, not as a mistake, as someone worth the effort. And the uncomfortable thing, the thing that sits with you after looking at all of this evidence, is that the idea of leaving behind the ones who can't keep up isn't some ancient survival instinct we've evolved past. It's a newer invention than the compassion that came before it.